Hello, and welcome to our CJS Hybrid Colloquium today. I'm Junko Habu, Professor of Anthropology and the Chair of the Center for Japanese Studies, or CJS. Our speaker today is Professor Yuta Suzuki, Associate Professor of the Institute of Liberal Arts, Tokyo Institute of Technology. He is also a visiting scholar of the Center for Japanese Studies here at UC Berkeley, and he arrived here recently, and I'm very happy to have him around with us. Before starting this event, I'd like to say that I recognize that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Fuchin, the ancestral and the unceded land of the Chocheño-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. The land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekuma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. I recognize that Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land. So today's talk is co-hosted by the Institute for Liberal Arts, Tokyo Institute of Technology, as well as Tokyo Tech Annex at Berkeley. And this is part of our ongoing effort to collaborate closely with Tokyo Tech on the basis of our Memorandum of Understanding. Special thanks to Professor Asa Ito of the Institute for Liberal Arts at Tokyo Tech and Mr. Hiro Ueda, the director of the Tokyo Tech Annex Berkeley, and many other faculty and staff members at Tokyo Tech who helped us make this colloquium happen. So let me introduce our speaker briefly. Professor Yuta Suzuki is an associate professor in the Institute for Liberal Arts, or ILA, at Tokyo Institute of Technology. And he received his BA, MA, and PhD in education from the University of Tokyo. His previous books include Formation and Development of Teachers' Professional Community, A Genealogy of Research on School Reform in the United States, written in Japanese in 2018. And this received the Japanese Association of School Education Award in 2019. His 2022 book, also in Japanese, titled School Reform Theory, A Challenge of American Educational Research in Japanese, received the Japan Association of American Educational Studies Award in 2022. And his book, Reforming Lesson Study in Japan, Theories of Action for Schools as Learning Communities from Routledge in 2022, received the Japan School Improvement Research Association Award in 2022. And also Legio Children's Wonder of Learning, Early Childhood Education at Legio Emilia, Japanese joint translation, was published from Access Publishing 2011. As you can see, his research interests include lesson study, school reform, action research, teachers' professionalism, professional learning, and professional community. He has been accumulating fieldwork and action research into school reform for over the past 15 years. And when I first talked to him on Zoom, I was really impressed by his enthusiasm as well as the depth of his knowledge. And I'm really pleased to have him here today to give our colloquium talk. I'm also honored to welcome Professor Judith Warren-Little, Carol Liu Professor of Education Policy, Emerita School of Education, UC Berkeley, as a panelist. So Professor Suzuki will give his talk for about 40 minutes, and that will be followed by comments from Professor Little. For the Zoom participants, please place your questions via the Q&A function, not through the chat function. And I'll be sitting on the other side of this room and checking Q&A. So the title of Professor Suzuki's talk today is Reforming Lesson Study in Japan, Theories of Action for Schools as Learning Communities. Please welcome Professor Suzuki.
Thank you, Dr. Habe, for the nice introduction. So I really appreciate it. Once again, my name is Yuta Suzuki, and thank you everyone attending the lecture despite your busy schedule. And actually, early morning in Japan is Asia and Southeast Asia. So, and I wanted to see so many people. So I can see the over 70s participants around the world on Zoom. So, and also I'd like to thank the Center for Japanese Studies at University of California, Berkeley, and the Institute for Liberal Arts, Tokyo Institute of Technology, Tokyo Tech, and the Tokyo Tech Annex Berkeley for making this event possible. And especially to, again, Dr. Habe, Dr. Little, Dr. Harvey, and Ms. Hado, Ms. Machida, and Ms. Sky. And also Dr. Ito, Mr. Ueda, Mr. Konis, Ms. Murakami for making this possible too. Thank you so much. So let me go ahead. Today, I will give about 35-minute talk about my reforming lesson study in Japan, a series of school as learning community, published by Routledge, 2022. Fortunately, a paperback edition was published just 3 days ago. So, next. Yes. Okay, yeah, here it is. This is today's contents. In the introduction, I talk about what a lesson study is and what school as learning community is. And then I'll talk about the problems and its reform of lesson study. So introduction, okay. So I briefly introduce myself. My research topic is theory and history of progressive education in the United States and Japan. So as Dr. Hab mentioned, I've been doing fieldwork and action research on school reform for over 50 years. So listening to and learning from our school sites is at the center of my work. So actually, this book thematizes lesson study reform and aims to examine the formation and development of school reform or school as learning community, 学びの共同体 in Japanese. In Japan for 10 years, from 1998 when SLC was in its infancy. So, next. So what is lesson study? What is lesson study? So lesson study is a series of activities to improve teachers' teaching, which includes planning, practicing, observing, and reviewing lessons from Meiji period. Notably, an increased awareness of issues in Japanese education and the proposal by Japanese education scholars from the late 1990s to the early 2000s coincided with growing international interest in Japanese lessons. So this is because while the highlighted international interest in Japanese lesson study tends to pursue a standard lesson study. A school reform for SLC pursue a lesson study reform, which resisted the blockage of classes and the standardization taken in Japanese of Japanese lessons. So, these two concepts will be discussed later, blockage and standardization. And then what is School as a Learning Community, SLC? SLC is a school reform that focuses on reforming lesson study to build a community where children, teachers, parents, and students can learn from each other. Hamanogo Elementary School has established in 1998 as the first part school of SLC with Professor Manabu Sato, actually who is my mentor at the University of Tokyo. As a new public school to be built to accommodate population growth in the city, which is the Chigasaki city in the Kanagawa Prefecture. And Toshiaki Ose, who is the founding principal, envisioned a pilot school for the city school reform when he was a former director of the City Board of Education. So actually, they are very important. So since then, more than 2,000 schools have committed themselves to SLC reform, quite revolution, which means a steady progress grassroots reform by the Sato, and more than 4,000. And then its global development has extended to North America, East Asia, and Southeast Asia over the 20 years. So in addition to that, the concept of teachers' collegiality should then be noted. So actually, Professor Judith Warren Little defined it, norms of collegiality and experimentation. She defined a quote, teachers pursue a greater range of professional interactions with fellow teachers and administrators, including talk about instruction, structured observation, and shared planning or preparation. So, and Professor Sato has translated this concept, raised by Judith Warren Little, as a doryosei in Japanese, and introduced it as an essential task of school reform to build a learning community, SLC, and as a relationship of professional solidarity among teachers in the creation and study of lessons. Through Sato's discussion, the concept of collegiality, doryosei, became a really common word of Japanese teachers engaging in school reform. So, these photos are the landscapes created by Hamanogo's school reform. What is happening in each of these? Actually, I will reflect on this at the end of my talk today. I aim to deepen our understanding of these. So while the book covered 5 pilot schools, elementary, middle, and high school, today's talk will focus on Hamanogo Elementary School and examine problems and reforms of lesson study. So in doing so, the object of analysis will be narrative teaching records, 実践記録 in Japanese. So Hamanogo teachers have written and published a record of their school reform once a year. So actually, this is the first record of their school reform. And then this is the second one. And the third one, actually, they published their narrative teaching record as a book. So these are the object of this analysis of this study. So at the most, more than 1,000 educators have visited this school, Hamanogo Elementary School, in a year. So let us uncover the reason why. So let us now examine the problems of lesson study. First, let's consider the interesting origin of the SLC at Hamano Elementary School. So what was the nature of the encounter between Ose, founding principal, and Professor Manabu-Sato? Quote, Ose said, why did Professor Manabu-Sato's theory of school reform based on the keyword learning community attract me so strongly? This was because I had some doubts about the relationship between schools and researchers. For me, who felt the need to transform the entire school from its education system and was searching for concrete strategies, the ideas stated in Manabu-Sato's writing and papers were concrete, and I thought that they could be immediately applied to today's school, which face many challenges. I know no other researcher than Professor Sato to have grasped teachers' psychology remarkably well, which is so difficult to understand, and to have initiated a concrete strategy based on his thorough knowledge of the limitation and the difficulty of change. Through the practice of 8,000 classrooms in Japan, the United States, and the other countries. So actually, this is prehistory of SLC. And then a new type of education research has appeared. I can draw my own school reform with this. Manabu-Sato's theory moved me and raised me to believe that this was theory that I had been looking for. So first, why did Sato's work leave such a strong impression on Ose? Note that it is specified as a theory of school reform. What Ose wanted was not a theory of teaching or a theory of learning, but a theory of school reform. Ose's doubts about the relation between schools and researchers and between practice and theory led him to Sato's work. This elucidated that both Ose and Sato shared a common awareness of the characteristic of the theory of school reform. Thus, Ose's encounter with Sato's theory was inevitable. The shock Ose felt at this moment made him evaluate Sato as a new type of education research. So what are the problems of lesson study? So let us refer here to Tadahiko Inagaki's argument. Inagaki, who was a mentor of Sato, actually, he was a mentor of my mentor, also pointed out that the standardization of lesson study played a role in the blockage of classes. Quote, lesson study, which has been widely used in schools since the first year of Meiji period, has been defining its regularity in terms of aims, contents, and methods since the 20th year of the Meiji period. And the methodology of lesson study has also been standardized, thus function as a means to block teachers' autonomous judgment and choice in the class. So in the following, I'll take these two perspectives, blockage and standardization as clue. First, it's about blockage. So what potential did Ose see in Sato's theory? Ose includes only one direct quote from Sato in Ose's paper, which sheds some light in this context. A quote, this is so quote, schools are places where people learn and grow together. Based on this simple idea, schools should be reconstructed. The road to the restoration of the school can only be studied from the restoration of the natural time, space, and relation, which were lost in the process of the modern maintenance and the rational armament of the school. And from the transition to learning community, in which the pains and joys of learning were valued and shared. So it must initially be noted that the school is the subject of all these quotations. And it should also be stated that this indicated a point of interest in author's criticism against schools. Noteworthily, author regarded Sato as a new type of education research and felt that he could attempt his own school reform with this. In author's understanding, Sato's theory of school reform represented the genealogy of the new theory that differed in character from the genealogy of the existing theory. Therefore, author could extract his conception of school reform from it. In other words, the theory of school reform proposed by Sato was not intended to apply to the actual implementation of the theory, that is, the theory into practice. Rather, it was a theory that pursued a theory in practice that would function in the school field. Thus, author as a practitioner of school reform could elicit its support in formulating his vision of school reform beyond the blockage. So next, let's focus on standardization. So with regard to the problems of lesson study, author also observed that the reluctance to open classes seems to be deeply related to the formation of a type of mass teaching and lesson study conference that has continued since the Meiji period to this day. The lesson study style supported by such a long tradition sought out universal technique that would be effective for any teacher in any class in the country. This style of lesson study has prevented teachers from creating dynamic teaching practices by squashing their own independent judgment and individuality about the aims, contents, and methods of teaching. And the lesson study for standardization has also created the problem of teachers learning solely on technical practices and focusing exclusively on the analysis of visible skills, such as questioning and instructing. The existing lesson study has created an internal situation in which the individuality of teachers is ignored, and both teachers and children become overtly tense and excited. That creates excessive pressure and make it difficult to open class on a daily basis. So our reform of the lesson study started with changing this. So Inagagi's research can be used as a starting point for the characterization of author's theory of action in lesson study. Author concludes that the excessive pressure of such standardizing practices had created a culture of teaching that was at odds with the idea of opening class. Notably, therefore, Hamanogo's lesson study reform was a departure from this trend and required each teacher to create individual instruction. In principle, such a sweeping reform of school culture represents an extremely complex and difficult undertaking, as it does not involve the mere conception of principal's plan that is faithfully followed by teachers. In fact, author's theory of action discouraged such a faithful implementation of the plan by teachers and was even recognized as a roadblock in reform. This is because also expected that teachers who are the change agent of school reform and the teaching profession are to fully demonstrate their independent judgment and individualities. So, and his description of the concept of collegiality is also interesting. Quote, there was a lot of discussion about an open school, but most of them were about open outwards. In order to reform school, it is important to open inward, open classroom and open classes to the public at any time. To this end, it is essential to build collegiality in which its teacher open, observe, critiques, and create works centered on teaching. At the same time, the establishment of autonomy in which each person is aware that the person who creates and promotes the curriculum, classes, and research is the teacher themselves. And also the person who is responsible is the teacher themselves and grows as an autonomous profession. So now let us examine the reform of lesson study. What kind of theory of action developed on reform of lesson study? So Hamanogo was exploring the original concept of learning that includes learning together, manabi in Japanese. Actually, this is a very complex and difficult, but and very interesting concept. But this term was not clearly defined in the narrative teaching record in its section, what is learning that includes learning together. Instead, it explicitly sought teaching that created learning that includes learning together. So quote, based on Manabu Sato and Inagaki's introduction to lesson study, this is an important Japanese book on lessons. So Hamano was focused on individual instruction tailoring and coaching individual orchestrating. So note that it is interesting to note that the teachers are trying to construct their own concept of learning and are openly in the process of exploring it. So Kazuo Hashimoto, who is a research director of the school, described a thrilling incident on April 25th, 1999. This is the second year of Hamano's school reform for SLC. So this is very interesting case. So the fourth grade class of Satoshi Yamazaki, second year of teaching. So he is actually he's a really early care teacher, founded excelling when their class was open to the public. Hashimoto, who observed the lesson with Professor Sato and other colleagues, described Yamazaki's classroom as follows. Quote, as soon as we stepped into Yamazaki's classroom, there was a scene where children's learning overlapped in layers. For some reason, just listening to that conversation exchange makes us smile. We felt an urge to stay in time and space. This is really interesting. This is certainly the exchange of learning that include learning together with SIG. But I don't know that the meaning of the event that gave birth to the learning. I left the classroom with such a sense of emotion and problem consciousness. So 1 month later, on May 21st, Mr. Yamazaki was nominated and conducted a research lesson using the fourth grade literature text, White Cap. What became of Yamazaki's research lesson? Hashimoto's description as follows, quote, the class began in the classroom of the fourth grade. The children began reading aloud at individual paces, echoing their voices. Each person has a different tone and speed. Unlike reading aloud in a monotonous chorus, that is really Japanese prevailing style, every child is heading toward the words of the literature text. One child remarks his own question. Why did he put a summer orange inside the white cap? As if in response to his question, the opinions of the children in the class began to connect and overlap. The teacher speaks a few words. The teacher never tried to lead their children to his own way of thinking. There was an atmosphere in the classroom where even a single person's muttering was received. Interestingly, Hashimoto's quest continued. A quote, Why is it that Yamazaki's classes have a warm, calm atmosphere and create a relationship of reciprocal learning? When we observe the expression of the faces of each child, we see that they are at ease with the teacher and attitude and express themselves honestly. This creates a learning atmosphere in which each child's differences are respected. The image of this classroom on how to respond the children are our common issues to research. He then quoted from Sato's suggestion in the lesson study conference, quote, in the classroom where the children learn together, teachers carefully choose words that reach the hearts of each child and talk to each other. Learning is to open one's mind to others and accept something different. A listening relationship must be formed as a basis for this. Hashimoto described such teachers and children as a personified learning that include learning together, marabi, and said that the point of view as clear starting point provided an opportunity for us to learn. Hashimoto's description was not limited to the expression of his own learning. Thus, the quoted statement implied the organizational learning that occurred at Hamano Elementary School because all teachers at this school observed the research lesson and subsequently participated in the lesson study conference. Actually, the learning achieved by individual teachers could have varied. However, at the very least, the above series of events have facilitated the accumulation of Hamano's organizational knowledge. Okay, so now for the conclusion. In this talk, we have identified what lesson study is and what a school reform for SLC is. And then examine what the principal and teachers in the part school see as the problems of lesson study, blockage and standardization, and examine how they have worked to reform lesson study, development of teachers' learning through discovery of children's learning. The Hamano's teachers found the realization of the learning that includes learning together that they had been exploring for a year in the class of a second year teacher. So the class is the early career teachers class. So I use it as a research lesson next month, in which all the teachers include Professor Sato as well as the veteran teachers. So all teachers learn from each other from the youngest teachers' teaching practices. This became one of the prototype of the lesson at Hamano Elementary School. The occurrence of this series of events itself was a characteristic of Hamano's school reform for SFC. That is a reforming lesson study based on the teacher's collegiality and autonomy. So these are the landscapes created by Hamano's school reform. What was happening in each. In the first photo, so the caption of the first photo said, quote, after the class, we watched the recorded video and had an enthusiastic 2-hour research discussion about one class. So this is exactly what Hamano's lesson study looks like. Hamano has been accumulating this lunchroom lesson study for a quarter of a century. So okay. So he is Professor Sato, and he is Toshiyaki Ose, a founding principal, and he is Satoshi Yamazaki. So actually, he is a veteran teacher. So all teachers learn from each other. This is a landscape of Hamano's lesson set reform. Next, the teachers of the one grade group in the staff. Actually, he is Hashimoto, Kazuo Hashimoto, who is a research director of this school. They are all sitting together with their desks close together in an open and airy atmosphere, ready to communicate with each other at all times. This is also a picture of the school opening inward. So this is last photo. So we can see children listening attentively to what one child says. So actually, this photo is at this book, back cover of this book. So this is a symbolic photo of school reform for SLC at Hamano Elementary School. So the perspectives of the teachers who are capturing this scene are also important. The teachers at the school are pursuing this kind of listening image of children. So this is the listening relationship of children in the class. So that is my talk. So finally, acknowledgement is here. So without this support, my research will not be realized. And finally, I would like to acknowledge the researchers and practitioners who are leading experts in this field and who have directly advised Professor Judith Warren-Little, Professor Millie Warren McLaughlin, Professor Joseph McDonald, and Professor Debbie Meyer and North Dakota Study Group, and Professor Catherine Lewis and Professor Manab Sato. So here are the references. Okay, so thank you very much for listening.
Okay. So first, thank you to Yuta Suzuki, Professor Suzuki, for his presentation and for his invitation to provide some brief comments. As he knows, I shared with Professor Sato an interest in the school as a workplace, with particular interest in the degree to which schools are characterized by norms of collegiality and inquiry. And it's important that those both go together, because if you have close professional and social relations, you can also have a very closed group. If you have experimentation without the collegiality, you don't have much coherence in the school. So the combination of collegiality and experimentation we've found to be important. So I should begin by expressing my surprise at seeing a book about reforming lesson study in Japan. And that surprise comes in large part because, as Professor Suzuki indicated, educators and education researchers were attracted to lesson study, as described first by Hebert and Stigler in their International Study of Mathematics Education in the US, Germany, and Japan. Because I think it struck us at the time as a deep form of inquiry into teaching and learning. That study, which involved the video-based investigation of 8th grade mathematics teaching, found that mathematics instruction in Japan was conceptually richer and more comprehensively effective than in the US. And they identified the well-established, long-established practice of lesson study as a significant contributor to the high quality of mathematics instruction. So as a way of being introduced to the Japanese practice of lesson study, I recall being impressed by a video created by Catherine Lewis, who's here in the audience, that illuminated this practice for me. So the video is titled, "Can You Lift 100 Kilograms?" And I was struck by, first, there's 3 segments here that I'll just show you briefly. Planning the research lesson, teaching and observing the research lesson, and following up with a post-observation discussion. I was struck in the planning segment by the way in which the teachers framed the goals of the research lesson in a way that I would never have seen, had never seen at that point among teachers in the US. First of all, they tied it to a broad research, school level goal for students to value friendship, develop their own perspective and ways of thinking, and enjoy science. What you would find in US schools, especially now in the wake of the testing-based accountability movement, are narrowly framed objectives focused on content learning and sensitive to the likelihood of testing. So these goals about enjoying science, and then there's a subsequent discussion about the particular science learning that's going to happen, which had to do with leverage, and wanting the students to encounter an unconventional problem, difficult enough, but intriguing enough that it would engage all the students. So here we have the actual lesson unfolding, and I do wish I had had the time to show you the video, because it's quite engaging. But here you see children trying to lift this 100-kilogram package up in the upper left-hand corner. It's clearly very heavy. This is a challenge that's not readily met, and that they would not have likely encountered prior to this class. And then the right-hand side, you see them having discovered and working to understand just how a leverage pole could work to lift the weight. And they haven't quite gotten there in this picture. You see the struggle. And finally, the discussion that the teachers and the observers, I should back up just a moment. What you can see if you look carefully in each picture is someone observing and taking notes, which is also would be an uncommon practice at that time in US schools. And finally, a discussion based not only on observation as recorded in these notes and drawings, but also on artifacts. And what you have here in part is a drawing done by a child of the plan that child had for lifting the object. So as conveyed in the video and in written descriptions that were available at the time or shortly thereafter, the lesson study process had a clear structure that seemed to me to enable genuine inquiry into student learning and to support refinements in lesson design. So lesson design has become widespread in the US since the Teaching Gap, the Hebert and Stigler book, was published in 1999. Even promoted at the state level, for example, in Florida, as a process within, quote, professional learning communities. But attempts to adopt and adapt lesson study in the US faced a number of challenges. They were akin to the challenges, actually, so by the time lesson study became popularized, there had been 2 decades of work on collaborative environments in schools. So that body of research had taken hold in the professional imagination, And so there were multiple efforts to build collaborative structures in US schools. And they did encounter challenges. So these were akin to the challenges actually that my colleagues and I here at Berkeley discovered as we conducted a study of 3 approaches to professional development in the late 1990s and early 2000s, built around what was called looking at student work. So these approaches had some similarity to lesson study. They focused on actual artifacts of student work. They allowed for considering evidence of student thinking. But they did not include the core element from lesson study of a research lesson and observed teaching. Nonetheless, I think that the challenges that surfaced are parallel in the 2 sets of studies. So one is instructional load and the configuration of the work week. Teachers in the US have a much higher ratio of in-class to out-of-class time than teachers in Japan or a lot of other countries. So there's relatively little time to do this intensive collaborative work together, much less observe at length in another teacher's classroom. Second, there are well-established norms of privacy, autonomy, and independence. And in this case, the kind of autonomy that works against learning together. Third, conceptions of mathematics learning and an orientation to student struggles. This mattered, particularly in mathematics, where Japanese teachers tend to think of students learning through engaging in these unconventional and challenging problems and figuring out through collaborative sense making how to make progress mathematically. Whereas US teachers, not all, a lot, but a lot, view teacher learning as coming from teaching of procedural approaches and a sequential building of small sets of skills. And the orientation to student struggle mattered. And I've observed this in a number of occasions where what I saw in the 100-kilogram tape was teachers sort of embracing student struggles and using them as objects of curiosity and inquiry and ways to really think about how students could be helped beyond the struggles. And in the US schools where we observed teachers talking with each other, struggle was something to be fixed sooner rather than later if possible. So people observing would tend to want to intervene if students were struggling. And an orientation to student work often as something to be evaluated and graded, and again, not to be looked at as an object of inquiry. So each core element of lesson study was likely to be unfamiliar to most American teachers. There were also challenges related to the standardization of innovations, and there's a long body of research on the implementation of innovation, where the impulse is often to try, and you've got something that has been demonstrated to work somewhere, and so the impulse is to try and standardize it when you implement it elsewhere. Whereas what we found actually works to make something take hold is what Berman and McLaughlin back in 1978 called mutual adaptation, where both the users and the innovation change over time as they are adapted to local circumstances. All right, so let's see where I am here. So, so the challenge of standardization that Professor Suzuki raised was apparent in our study of the looking at student work processes, where teachers tended to rely on what were termed protocols to guide discussion. So protocols were designed to kind of interrupt teachers' usual conversation and responses to student work, which is to evaluate it, and to stimulate an open-minded but focused examination of what the work could tell them about student thinking and student learning and teaching practice. And there's some evidence from quasi-experimental studies that the use of student-focused protocols is associated in some cases with student achievement gains. But in our observation, protocols fairly often became standardized and ritualized in a way that seemed to impede teacher inquiry. The most sustained and lively and generative conversations about student work occurred when groups took a flexible, creative approach to the use of protocols and adapted them to their own purposes. So over time, research on lesson study and other forms of collaboration that center particularly on looking at student work have helped to demonstrate the conditions that are conducive to the implementation of lesson study. And this is something where I think, since my own research is more broadly on workplace conditions of teacher learning and not specifically on lesson study, where Catherine Lewis's work and others' work could help us. But consistent with Professor Suzuki's premise, those conditions that research has surfaced entailed a professional workplace culture with an improvement-oriented ethos and strong collaborative ties and practices. We've seen the widespread embrace of terms like teacher learning community and professional learning community over the years. The minute professional learning community turned into an acronym, PLC, it pretty much lost all meaning. And you could expect that that term, and probably like the term lesson study, masks a wide variety of approaches to the practice. But nonetheless, building and sustaining a workplace culture, I mean, the research both shows that learning community is particularly productive. It's associated with student learning gains, the capacity to respond to external pressures, the ability to pursue school reform, but building and sustaining such a workplace culture in American schools presents no small challenge. However, it's a challenge worth pursuing because the more research we do that ties to teacher and student learning, the more we found the benefits of lesson study and other similar ventures. So research in the US has demonstrated the benefits of lesson study, both the teacher and student learning, including when teachers pursue lesson study as the principal form of professional development. So I think, let's see, I'm probably close to being out of time here. So I'm just going to talk about one study since Catherine's here in the room. In 2017, Catherine Lewis and Rebecca Perry published the results of a randomized controlled study, which the government likes to think is the gold standard of research, in which 39 educator teams with over 200 teachers, nearly 200 of them being elementary grades teachers, were randomly assigned to an experimental condition or to one of two control conditions. The experimental condition involved locally organized lesson study cycles supported by a research-based resource kit targeted to the teaching and learning of fractions in the elementary grades. And it's worth noting that the addition of the resource kit made the lesson study environment more akin to that in Japan, where the teacher's edition of mathematics textbooks is more likely than those in the US to have information that would deepen teachers' understandings of learning about fractions and to anticipate the kinds of strategies that students might attempt and how those strategies might support understanding or lead to confusion. One of the control conditions also involved the implementation of lesson study, but without the resource kit. And the second control condition was business as usual. Both the lesson study conditions were judged more favorably by teachers as professional development and business as usual, which wasn't a surprise to me. But a real insight here is this combination of high quality curriculum materials and the lesson study process is accounted for these very positive outcomes. There's been another recent study, Akiba, Murata, Howard, and Wilkinson have done a study in Florida that shows the variation in lesson study implementation and how it is associated with variation in desirable outcomes. So back to the surprise. I was intrigued by the title of Professor Suzuki's book, Reforming Lesson Study in Japan. What could possibly need reforming in Japanese lesson study, a practice so admired by educators and researchers in the US? So the answer as I understand it, is that Professor Suzuki is seeing, and Professor Sato, seeing lesson study not as a discrete practice or technique, a standardized routine, but as fundamentally embedded in and reflective of conception of the school and a profession. And here's where it seems to me that the Japanese and American experiences are converging in a certain way. The conditions most conducive to productive lesson study center on a collaborative and improvement-oriented professional culture and related structural supports of time, space, and material. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I learned so much from this talk today, and I never really thought of this topic as an archaeologist. This was a completely new topic to me, but I learned so much. And one thing that is common is really, it is important to understand the historical context and then understand the big picture as a whole while looking at individual case studies. And Professor Suzuki will be with us for a while. So I think the audience can ask additional questions, and he'll be with us as a visiting scholar for a while. So I'm very happy to continue our conversation. I'd like to thank Professor Suzuki again for his wonderful talk. Thank you very much.